me turn my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and we are still in April, Financial Literacy Month. I feel like I say this all the time, but I'm very excited about today's show because I feel like the goal, and I've said this before, I'll restate it, when it comes to my focus this year for Financial Literacy Month, I just want to think about it outside the box, a little bit more raw conversation, and not just be dream selling or giving you a bunch of, just straight like things you could read off of a brochure or a pamphlet or in a book somewhere. I want to actually have real conversations that tackle every side of the various conversations or various topics, if you will. And today we're going to be talking about side hustles and gigs and entrepreneurship, working for yourself, and these, things that we see on the internet from the self-help community and the entrepreneur bros and all of the glorification of the entrepreneurial journey. And not to take anything away from it, I'm grateful that I'm on this pathway. It's been difficult, but incredibly rewarding, and I can't think or envision myself living any other way. But there's a lot of shit that I did not know, or a lot of conversations that I didn't have access to, or people just weren't having, about how truly difficult this path is, what it takes away from you, the toll that it takes on you. And I don't think I was mentally prepared for it completely, even though I had a bunch of experience, since my early days of trying to make it as a musician since I was 17 years old, And I wanted to have an honest conversation about what it means to own your own business, to have a side hustle, to freelance, whatever it might be. And I had come across this article on entrepreneur.com specifically talking about people of color when it comes to side hustles and gigs. And it was from Dr. Nika White. And I loved how she sort of tackled it from all angles. She didn't give you this, rose-colored glasses version of what it means to be an entrepreneur. She gave you the good, the bad, the ugly, and had a real conversation about it that I thought was fair, and really put into perspective the difficulties of this journey, and I think a real raw conversation, if you will, that I wish I had access to when I was younger, to maybe be more prepared, or even just a few years ago. So we have her on the show today. I'm really, really excited about it, to have this conversation. I think that it's going to be really beneficial, and I think there's a just amazing education process within it. So without further ado, we'll do it for our Mi Gente segment, my interview with Dr. Nika White. Mi Gente. My guest today is an award-winning management and leadership consultant, a keynote speaker, published author, and executive practitioner across corporate, government, nonprofit, and education sectors. Dr. Nika White, how you feeling?
I am feeling great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Of course. Yeah, we were talking a bit off mic before I turned on the camera. As I was kind of brainstorming how I wanted to tackle Financial Literacy Month this year, I kind of wanted to hit it from a different angle than sort of the normal, credit or real estate or whatever it might be, and also just have real conversations around the positives and negatives of sort of all that we hear when it comes to building wealth. And one of those big conversations is the idea of side hustles. And in particular, as we sort of move into a primarily gig economy, as for what a lot of people are sort of predicting. I found this article that you had written for entrepreneur.com that I found to be sort of really profound, and I thought really tackled this from both the good and bad side of this idea of the gig economy, right? And the title of the article is "People of Color Are Building Wealth by Working Side Hustles, but Here's Why the Gig Economy Could Be Hurting Them Too." And I love these types of conversations because I think in the social media era that we live in, everybody sort of paints the world with this sort of rainbow, beautiful aesthetic as far as entrepreneurship and side hustles and building your own business. And because of the tremendous amount of opportunity there is to build wealth or build extra income via the internet, we sort of glorify it and don't have real conversations about the difficulties or challenges that people will face along the way. And I think as a result, many people are surprised when they go down that route, or just sort of realizing it's not actually what it's all cut out to be, right? And I love having this sort of real conversation. And in the article you reference, and this is as of 2023, you say 1 in 3 Americans had a side hustle. And you seem, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to speak for you, you have mixed feelings about side hustles and this sort of, I guess, gig economy overall. So I kind of want to start there, if you will. What's your sort of takeaway elevator pitch when somebody asks you your thoughts on the gig economy or just side hustles in general?
Yes. Well, again, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation because I think it's an important one. With a lot of things, you're having to balance tension points. And that is what I wanted to bring to this particular conversation. I do believe there are a lot of positives and negatives. And so let's first start with just understanding what is the gig economy. It refers to the labor market and is characterized by short-term, flexible jobs. Often they are referred to as gigs. We all are familiar with that term. But instead of traditional long-term employment. And with this model, oftentimes people work as freelancers, independent contractors, temporary workers, and they are, getting their side hustle on, if you will. And they're juggling multiple jobs for multiple clients and organizations. Some of the common features that I think is important to just level set and bring some context to this conversation about the gig economy is that usually it's project-based or it's task-based, right? So think about driving for Uber or, delivering food for DoorDash, or maybe freelancing work with Upwork or some other type of organization. It also leads to a good bit of flexibility, which, I could consider that more of the positive side, because people like to have flexibility and people want to be able to choose and decide how much work they do. And even be able to increase and supplement their income to make ends meet. But there's no traditional benefits with it, like healthcare, paid time off or retirement plans. So it really is just a way to put some extra cash into your pocket. And so when I think about that, when I talk about the tension points, I also think that it's important to realize this may not be consistent income, but it can be if someone works it in that regard. So there's a lack of job security, which is why usually there's multiple of these gigs that people are taking on at a time. So again, I think it's important to recognize the tension points between the pros and the cons and how to best balance that, which is why I talk about it as kind of a mix of both the good and the bad. But what I have seen that has been really incredible and instrumental is that side hustles can incredibly increase the wealth of potentially people who may not have even seen themselves being in a predicament to where they had discretionary funds or even just to meet their monthly bills, right? And so it is making a difference. But when you consider how hard they're having to work, how many extra hours, the mental drain and the mental strength is definitely compromised. And that's where I feel like we need to raise a red flag just to say, be mindful of this as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you hit on so many different things. I kind of want to also start, I guess, you're specifically talking from the angle of people of color in this article. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what are sort of the unique aspects of this conversation that particularly have to do with people of color?
Yes, well, we know that history certainly has proven, and even present day has proven, that systemic racism still exists. And so in terms of people of color being able to compete effectively in the marketplace, by getting jobs where they can be gainfully employed and paid comparatively to their white counterparts, or even have upward mobility for increased revenue opportunities. Sometimes that is not necessarily happening at a rate and a degree in which they are deserving of. And so because of that, that's why these individuals have, stepped out and taken on these extra side hustles. I'm also keenly aware that from an entrepreneur standpoint, there's a lot of things that can prevent people of color from being able to really reach their full potential outside of even systemic racism. For example, the lack of access to capital. And lack of access to capital is significant because it takes money to be able to make money and to run a business. And then secondly, I want to bring to the conversation maybe the lack of access to knowledge. Just because we know our trade and our craft and we have passion for it and can do it well does not necessarily mean that we are equipped with the business savvy sense to be able to grow and scale a business, build capacity, and take that business to the next level. And a lot of times, those are just not the connection points or the resources knowledge-wise that we have available at our fingertips because of, again, the systemic history of racism in our country.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on a lot of things. I think the lack of knowledge stuck out to me because it resonates so much. I think, for me, I didn't grow up with parents who had an entrepreneurship background, right? I'm the first one to sort of be able to work for themselves. Yeah. And, people that I met along the way who had parents who were entrepreneurs and owned businesses, throughout their lives growing up, they had a very different understanding of basic things like accounting. Right. Their parents who own businesses, often had accountants on retainer, right? Their own personal accountant to help them each month and manage things and tell them, how much need to be put away and all these different things. Where for me, I'm using, I originally using tax pros, the normal, chain things that are sure they'll get you by, but they're not going to optimize and set you up to really take advantage of the positives that come from being an entrepreneur, right? And that lack of knowledge, I had to sort of realize that for myself. And if it wasn't for by chance meeting people and befriending people whose parents had that experience and realizing, wow, they actually have like on staff, essentially somebody they can always go to refer to find out, what's the best practice. And I'm sort of just fumbling and bumbling something that's incredibly important, like taxes or write-offs or all these different things. And that, is incredibly frustrating because it means that, I lost a great deal of potential income or write-offs or benefits of being an entrepreneur for years just because of my ignorance by proxy of not having anybody around me who had that experience prior to me.
That is so many people's situation, but it's particularly pervasive within communities of color. I akin it to almost first generation college students, right? For those, individuals who are privileged to be able to have the opportunity to go to college, if they are a first gen, what we've learned a long time ago is that oftentimes the matriculation towards degree completion is that percentage is decreased for people of color because usually they are the first gen. They don't have a resource or a lifeline they can reach out to say, hey, I'm having issues, this conflict that I'm trying to manage with my professor. I don't really understand how to manage my study habits while I'm working at the same time to pay, while I'm in school. And so when they are met with those challenges, who do they go to? Usually they try to figure it out on their own. And so without those resources, they aren't able to be successful. And so when we align that and see it, the parallels to that example to what's happening as first generation entrepreneurs with the side hustle, or maybe it's even, an opportunity where this is their only way. Because again, a lot of people lost their jobs, right? And particularly people of color were directly impacted more so than the non-people of color during the pandemic. And even now, when we see all this happening in this political realm, there are a lot of people losing their jobs. So they are forced to take on leveraging the gig economy kind of structure and being able to connect to support their families, but not without the challenges of having to not have access again to capital, to key information. But that's changing because, again, when we saw that the pandemic produced so many people of color that were starting their own businesses, it was exciting. It was something that people then began to notice, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it too. And so we are finding that there are a lot of organizations that have been providing support by developing these incubator type programs. For 10 years, I ran a Minority Business Accelerator program, which was just specifically for the purpose of taking high potential minority owned businesses, putting them through an ecosystem where they were receiving targeted training, technical assistance, connection opportunities to key procurement leaders, just so they can have a chance to compete effectively. But without that ecosystem of support, many of those businesses would not still be in business today.
Yeah, and I mean, even the idea of information, I was ignorant of things like that even existing till just now, right? So it's this being able to have these conversations, right, is a privilege and something new for many people, myself included, and I think to your point in the article, you referenced the idea of capital, right? And it's been proven that minorities have a harder time accessing capital, a harder time
100%.
accessing traditional loans for their businesses, right? So
Yes.
oftentimes they are relying on whatever rainy day money they have put away, or family and friends who are pooling their resources together, and that potentially is putting them at risk. God forbid something goes wrong with the idea, it doesn't turn into what they want it to be, where it's no longer sort of the bank's money, but you actually just ruin the lives of friends and family along the way, right? And there's an extra mental burden that goes along with, I think, that pressure, but then also if that sadly becomes the reality of having to deal with the fallout of that as well. So I'd love to speak to that a bit as well.
It's what we have become accustomed to,
Sure.
particularly from a marginalized space, because people of color have always had to endure a lot of trauma, but we have learned to be able to hold both trauma and joy at the same
Mhm.
time just for survival. So that
Mhm.
level of resilience is built in us because it was a part of how our ancestors showed up.
Yeah.
But again, if we look at today and we look at the mental health issues that are taking place due to stress and stress related diseases that are impacting communities of color, we do have to weigh, is this worth it? Are there
Mhm.
other ways in which we can get at our end goal without it potentially compromising our bodies, right? And costing
Right.
us our lives. And that's why I think that the mixed message of let's kind of weigh and understand both tension points was really important for me. And I think it's also important to bring to the conversation that when you don't have access to capital and you are trying to, by any means necessary, make your business work, make it grow, and be profitable and scale, then you often find that you will underprice yourself. And
Mm.
that sets a precedent. And so it almost starts this vicious cycle of creating other challenges for a lot of minority businesses that they can't necessarily overcome. Because we know
Mhm.
sometimes once you brand yourself as an entity that is, low cost, then people
Mhm.
come to expect that. And
Right.
so being able to compete effectively, while you may be getting the business, do you know enough to be able to realize that are you really making profit, or are you breaking even, or
Right.
are you even losing money? And again, those are
Mhm.
just some of those lessons that sometimes we don't know about. The other point I think is really critical as well is that the community and connection is so important because
Mm.
we don't know what we don't know.
Mhm.
So if you're an entrepreneur, sometimes that can be very isolating, and
Right.
particularly for minority businesses who don't have these wide networks of other
Mm.
entrepreneurs in which they're connecting with. And so that sense of isolation can also weigh heavy on those communities. And so I also think that it's important that these incubators are providing that level of community and connection to be able to say, hey, I've tried this and it worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Or here's a lesson that I wanted to share so you can try to avoid it creating challenges for you. That
Mhm.
isolation piece is important to the conversation as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I think oftentimes the mindset often is I have to go at this alone, right? There's nobody can help me. I'm
Yes.
on my own to figure all these things out, or the idea that being self-made, quote unquote, right? And
Yes.
it's sort of a ridiculous notion because I think we've attached the stigma of somebody who is not self-made, that they had some sort of trust fund or whatever it might be. But the reality is everybody, regardless if they are successful through their own means, had somebody who helped them out with advice along the way, or their first sale, or whatever it might be, or pitch them to a potential client on their behalf. Everybody had some sort of help, even if it wasn't monetary, right? And we get so caught up on ego and pride and the idea of wanting to do it ourselves that we don't realize that we need that access to community, to your point, or even whether it's resources online of joining groups and just being able to share information. That is what
Yes.
people who have been successful in business, they've had that sort of access along the way, even those who are quote unquote self-made.
no one gets to where they are on their own. There's
Hmm.
always going to be someone that can be attributed to their success, even if it's
Yeah.
just knowledge sharing or support and encouragement. I mean, sometimes, you need that pat on the back to say, keep going, right?
Hmm.
And so I am real big on community. I want to just share that I'm showing up to this conversation today, not just, being someone that writes for Entrepreneur and a, diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner who writes often about topics that are of importance to different marginalized communities, but I am talking from direct experience. The reason that
Hmm.
I am an entrepreneur has everything to do with proximity to people that are close to me and my family, that have had entrepreneurship as part of their journey. And I'll
Hmm.
share a quick story.
Yeah.
My daughter, who got her master's degree from London School of Economics, a few years ago, when she was making decisions about where to plant herself after she completed her degree, she had so many opportunities, including one with a very notable firm where she was going to be making six figures. And she decided that, you know what? I have seen my mom and my dad both run and
Hmm.
scale and grow businesses. Why would I take my time, my talent, and then go
Hmm.
and apply it to another company, another organization? I want to stay and I want to help build the family enterprises. And I
Hmm.
bring that conversation to this dialogue today because I think also we have to be willing to pass that knowledge down. What you
Hmm.
see is often what you feel like you can replicate. And that
Hmm.
is how we can begin to build wealth as a community of people. And so I just
Yes.
wanted to share that as well.
No, I love that, and actually, it brought me to I think a topic that maybe a lot of people who are excited by the idea of working for themselves,
Yeah.
maybe they don't truly want to look in the mirror and really ask the question. It sounds great on paper, but is this really for me? Right? Because I
Yeah.
think we're again in the social media era, it's like we're shaming people into saying if you are working a job where you're working for someone else, there's something wrong with you. There's so much money to be made out there. You're an idiot if you're not out there making money, right? And it's such a ridiculous notion because the reality is you have to have a certain type of personality to be an entrepreneur, and one is not better than the other of being an employee
Yes.
or being an entrepreneur. But I feel like a lot of people don't have that honest conversation with themselves about, am I really cut out for this? Is it really what I even want at the end of the day? Or am I just sort of doing it for pride and, because I hate my
Yeah.
boss, essentially, right? And I'd love to hear from your perspective how
Yeah.
somebody can have that real conversation to figure out if this is really the route for them.
Oh, this is a great question. People get into entrepreneurship for a variety of reasons. One is
Mm-hmm.
to just support their lifestyle. They're not looking to really scale and to,
Mm.
make tons and tons and tons of money. They just want to be able to support their lifestyle, support their families.
Yeah.
And we call those like lifestyle businesses. But there are some individuals that do see entrepreneurship as a pathway to building wealth,
Mm-hmm.
wealth that can create generational wealth, can be passed down. And so I think that to your point of really assessing what is my why for even considering this and being mindful about all that that entails.
Mm-hmm.
It's not everyday joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of pain that comes with the entrepreneurial journey. You
Yeah.
have days where you may second guess yourself. You have days where you're challenged by cash flow issues or just
Mm-hmm.
decisions that you're having to make. Entrepreneurs wear a lot of many different hats. And so it's not just
Mm-hmm.
about knowing your trade and your craft, it's also about building up your leadership skill sets, your resiliency, your ability to problem solve, your ability to sell. I mean, all of the things that come with running a solid business. Now,
Mm-hmm.
to your point, though, that is not for everyone. I
Mm-hmm.
think having an understanding of where our strength lies, right, and what we have an appetite for and emotional capacity for is important because otherwise we may find ourselves tapping into something that from afar looks like it's the best case scenario for us, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
really it's not. And then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you may just want to try it. That's why I think some of these side, gigs
Mm-hmm.
are important because it gives people a chance to test the waters while they are
Right.
also in maybe another full-time job or have other opportunities of income, and then they
Mm-hmm.
can realize for themselves if it's something that they want to stick with. But there is no shaming in with one's going the employee route or one's going the entrepreneur route. We all have to make decisions that are best for us by knowing ourselves well and our situations and our why.
Yeah, and I love that. I love the sort of just the honesty in general of the conversation we're having, right? And to your point, the lows that come along with being an entrepreneur inevitably, and for me, I've changed my perspective on this a lot, to be honest. I was always of the mindset like, fuck it, quit your job and just go, and it's not until I had a brutal year in business of where nothing seemed to work at all for the first time in basically, my entire journey, that I recognized like, oh, you have to have a certain stomach to be able to get knocked down and like somebody kicks the shit out of you and you still get up and ask for more, essentially, right? And that is, it's a psychotic mindset that you really have to love what you do and believe in what you do. And, to me, I personally can't foresee not doing this, right? Not doing my media things and not working for myself. I'd rather be in prison somewhere, essentially, But again, like, it's brutal, right? Even for me with that love, I questioned it along the entire way. I was almost ready to give up, after having one of those years. And I feel like that is in a really honest sort of conversation you have to have with yourself. Like, am I willing to lose everything just to try this out? Does it mean that much to me, And hopefully it doesn't come to that point, but you have to love it that much because it will beat the crap out of you at some point.
It will. Reconciling that this may not work out is definitely internal reflection that I feel like is really important to have. Not in a way to where it can be, compromising of our psyche and our belief in ourselves.
Sure.
We need to be able to bet on ourselves, but it's more of a reality check and understanding of all that goes into being able to start, run, scale, and build a business, if that's what someone's desire is. I think another really crucial point to bring to the conversation as we think about the tension points of, getting into the gig economy and having all these side hustles, especially as it relates to communities of color, is that communities of color, when they are working for employers, we hear stories all the time about how they feel so compromised in the workplace. They feel unseen, unvalued, unheard, and that weighs heavy on someone, right? We hear about workplace toxicity all the time. So that's another reason why we've seen such an influx and growth of people deciding, you know what, I'm going to work for myself because I don't want to have to endure the bias, the microaggressions, the things, the unfairness, the inequities that can exist in oftentimes workplaces, especially during this day and time where a lot of organizations are devaluing DEI because of what we're seeing within the political realm, right? And so I think that's important to bring to the conversation as well. Again, it's another one of those pros, but it does not necessarily take away the con of still having to address all the other complexities of entrepreneurship. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think also to that point, maybe you're just in a bad job situation that's not suiting you, right? That's also an option to look at. Maybe a different career path, a different company, a different whatever, a different corporate culture, That also, it doesn't just have to be my boss sucks, that means I need to go into business for myself. Again, with, blindly just doing that. Again, it could just be a change of scenery that's needed, right? And I think those are real conversations again to be had. And I want to go back to something you had mentioned as well, because I thought it was really important. The idea of undervaluing yourself and underpricing your services, right?
Yes.
Because I think often people of color struggle with imposter syndrome, right, in these positions.
Yes.
And to your point, it causes us to underprice and undervalue our worth, essentially, which then doesn't allow us to potentially scale a business or run a successful business or be compensated properly for our time, right? And I think, there's a lot of, maybe unworthiness, but I think it is that idea of we don't see ourselves at the same level oftentimes as our white counterparts, or that we don't have the same credibility that they have because we don't have a particular background that they have, right? So I would be curious, if you were coaching somebody, sort of what would be your advice to sort of not get lost in that trap where you're sort of, if you're lucky, just getting by because you're not charging what you're supposed to charge for your goods and services?
So I talk about this in the article, and I'm so glad that you amplified this point, because I like to refer to imposter syndrome as a misdiagnosis. And I say that it's a misdiagnosis because the imposter syndrome that we may feel that we have, that we may perceive is real, has nothing to do with us, but has everything to do with what society has presented to us about ourselves. So we need to refute that thought. We need to see it as a misdiagnosis. That's not a part of my story. That's not a part of how I want to show up, right? Because that is damaging to our psyche and the mental capacity for us to really have belief in ourselves and to think with clarity so that we can be successful. So that's the first thing. The next thing is, I think it goes back to some of the strategies we talked about before. We have to surround ourselves with people that are really for us. They want to invest in our success. We may be starting out with our side hustle, maybe someone that we know is 4 or 5 years ahead, and they could be a resource around how did they structure their pricing, how do they negotiate, right? Because negotiation oftentimes is a big part of it. Are they equipped to be able to know what to ask for in terms of the terms when they are entering into relationships and partnerships? Sometimes companies will say, no, it's going to be 60 days net. Well, maybe they can't wait 60 days. Maybe they needed 15, 30 days net. And so I think it's about being exposed to information, and it takes a village. It takes all of us who have any type of knowledge to be willing to not hold that close to the chest, but to share that. And I will say this too, if you are new and you're just starting out, there's nothing wrong with you being able to have pricing that at least gives people the entry to test you out, right? To see if they want this to be a long-term partnership. But communicate that. This is an introductory kind of new relationship pricing. It is not going to be this way going forward, because the big challenge is that when we start out as a discount brand, if you will, that's when people start to expect that. And that's where really the challenges come in. But just being communicative about, I'm starting out, I'm new, I have an introductory pricing, and then really leveraging that as a way to be able to scale the business by shifting and revising pricing when at the appropriate time.
I love that, and I also think you'd mention when you're talking about like a company might say, oh, we're net 60, we're net 30, whatever it might be. Nothing is set in stone, right? And I think that's the other thing that
just
like I was
and say, okay.
Exactly. I lived in fear of if I express, my opinion and wish to do something a different way, they're going to pull the deal off the table, pull the opportunity away, right? And that causes you to get into situations that you're not completely comfortable with, right? And it's not until, again, years of doing this and going back and forth and like negotiating contracts that I realized doesn't matter if they have it written down on paper and they hand you the contract, you can push back on things. You have the ability to do so, right? But I think we live in fear of losing the opportunity. And the unfortunate part about it is those who are experienced in business are trying to prey on those of us who are scared to lose the opportunity, right? They're trying to take advantage of that and present you with oftentimes the worst terms possible because they know you're probably too scared to push back, and they're going to get that extra, little chunk out of this that they wouldn't have if you were actually an experienced negotiator.
And sometimes we don't realize this, but sometimes people aren't just vetting their decisions based upon the lowest bid. In fact, there's a lot of studies and research out there that says you can garner more support and respect when organizations are seeking quality, when you aren't coming in at the bottom of the barrel every single time, right? Not everyone is looking for a low cost option. They're looking for a fair cost option that is commensurate with the value of what you're bringing. So then that goes back to the knowledge and the upskilling and the training. How are you delivering your services? Are you doing it in a way, and are you equipped to do it in a way to where you can align your fees appropriately with what's commensurate to what you are delivering? The other thing is we can't forget that sometimes partnering can also be our entry point. Maybe you don't have the capacity to do it on your own, but perhaps there's a buddy that's in a similar space that have different skill sets, right? And the two can partner together to be able to go after certain opportunities. And so you have to at least try, but the answer may be no at the end, but at least you understand that and you know that, right? But always, always try. And I think that we're seeing an increased value of small businesses among a lot of large companies because they realize that small businesses employ so many people in society. And so there's a recognition of the importance of the value of small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, for better or worse, as we move towards a gig economy, a lot of these companies are trying to cut expenses wherever they can, right? And unfortunately,
Yeah.
an employee is viewed as an expense, right? And how can we get as much out of these employees by providing as little as humanly possible is sort of how they optimize their corporate structure in this capitalistic society that we live in. And one of those things is, well, we can just hire gig workers that we don't have to pay any benefits to, that, it's a contracted rate or whatever it might be. We can cut them at any time if we deem it necessary. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of companies are sort of moving towards that structure. So
Yeah.
I guess anybody that is, after hearing this conversation, right, because we talked a lot about a lot of the negatives of this whole idea of side hustles, or if your industry is becoming more gig-based rather than full-time based, what are some of the things that people should do to kind of mentally prepare themselves to be as successful as possible in potentially working for themselves or having to switch from a full-time structure to a gig structure?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question that can lead to some insightful assessment, internal assessment. First is just, beginning to be very thoughtful. You can start documenting what are your skill sets, what are your interests, right? And then aligning those interests and skill sets with a firm why. Why are you attracted to this idea of the gig economy and having kind of multiple opportunities that you can tap into? And for many, the simple answer is flexibility. I get bored. Maybe I don't like doing the same thing every day, going to the same place. I like the variety. And so that flexibility could be a high priority on the list of what attracts them to that type of situation. And that can help to inform, how to best position yourself. I also think that if there's an area where you feel like there's an opportunity because the market is asking for it, there's a demand for it, then be willing to maybe invest the time to upskill yourself. I am hearing a lot of employers these days talk about how they're moving completely away from this requirement of a 4-year degree, and they are very much prioritize around, we want people that go to a trade school. We want people that have completed, got their degree maybe from a community college, because it's those skills and those specialized training and trades that they're really interested in. And so, again, I think we have to all assess that what maybe in the past has been always the approach as the leading practice. I always say leading practice and not best practice, because then you have to say, well, best for whom? And that's my point here. We have to each assess what is best for our individual situation. And so, and then talking with people, seeing what opportunities are out there, and the great thing about the gig economy is that you have greater flexibility to try different things, because again, they're temporary, they're maybe project based, to see if it's something that you want to maybe pursue long term. So it works for those who are interested in that type of lifestyle. And I'm finding that a lot of the younger generations, that's what they don't want to be tethered to one specific organization where they have to show up to the workplace in person from a 9 to 5. That is not what they're seeking at all. So there's a market for the type of individual that I think is akin to all of the benefits that a side hustle or a gig economy can allow for.
Yeah, and I think also you kind of touched on it, but I think there's also, because companies are not as focused on college degrees, 4-year degrees, and sort of these prerequisites of, I guess, traditional academia, if you will, they're more focused. Somebody who has experience or who has a portfolio that could showcase they can do exactly what that company wants to do at a high level, they have a great opportunity there. And I think as much BS as social media and technology brings, it also potentially connects you with anybody you want in the world, right? So I've personally seen this in testing it. You can cold email somebody and deliver a pitch to them of a problem you want to solve for their company or their brand. And maybe 9 out of 10 times you're not going to get a response. But again, as that old saying goes, you just need one yes, right, at the end of the day. And any company leader who is, actually trying to do their job well is not going to pass up somebody who actually sent them a concise email and showcased the ability to see a problem and the sort of background and ability to actually handle that problem, right? They're going to want to, at the very least, meet you and figure out who is this person that is blindly emailing me, right? And I think that is also something that, like, people see it's just unheard of to a lot of people, right? I have that conversation with friends and like, what, you emailed the CMO of this company an idea for what their pitch? I was like, of course I did. I have experience in it. I like the brand. Let me pitch them and see if we can create something, right? And again, doesn't work every time, but I've seen success where now this brand is interested in working with me in one of my, creative tasks. And it's because of that cold email and taking advantage of the tools that are, available to all of us via the internet.
Yeah, and I'll say that while there's certainly a propensity for some people to get the messaging just right and the timing just right to where a cold email could certainly elicit a response, I often like to also encourage, though, having a strategy. And part of that strategy is really building up your personal brand.
Yes.
What you want to be known for. What spaces are you showing up in to make sure that you're visible and that people are associating you and your company, your side hustle, your business, whatever it is, so that when they are in the moment of need, you will be top of mind. And so the level of consistency around just having a presence, even if it's just social media, pick one or two of the different social media platforms that you feel like is going to best reach your audience, and then start there and just really be consistent in your messaging and allowing yourself to be seen as a go-to for whatever kind of space that you're in. Don't try to be all things to all people. I think that that's also really important. Sometimes we can, just attempt to leverage all of our skill sets. Just because you can do everything doesn't necessarily mean that you should be. And so that's another thing. And lastly, I'll say find something that brings you joy. If you're going to have a side hustle and you're going to maybe be a part of the gig economy where you're touching a lot of different things, make sure there's a connection point to it. And I say that because while maybe the motivation is I just need to have multiple sources of income to support my family. That's one direction. Another is because we have named the challenges in terms of the mental stress and all of those things, it is important to at least be aligned with something that can help ground us and center us because we have a level of pleasure or enjoyment in what we do and what we're offering. That's important too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the other side of it, which you talk about in the article, is the mental health aspect, right? And burnout and these different things. And I think when you're in your 20s, it's a little bit it's difficult regardless of how old you are. But when you're in your 20s, you don't have as many responsibilities that you also have to carry on your back while trying to build up this business or this entrepreneurial journey, right? And as you get older and you have a mortgage or you have rent to pay, groceries, you have a dog, you have kids, you have a spouse, whatever it might be, all these things are beautiful, but they also can create tension in the journey of being an entrepreneur, which requires you to give so much of yourself, right? So I'd be curious how maybe even you have found the balance, especially those early days where they do require the long days, the late nights, early mornings, right? That you can't really escape it. How do you balance adult life, if you will, while trying to make this happen healthily?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll challenge the notion that maybe younger individuals that don't necessarily have a mortgage or some of the other things that you named are less inclined to feel the pressures of life. I think that they feel them equally. They're just different or different pressures, right? And so I really believe in starting people when they are young around the mental strength and the importance of taking care of radical self-care. For me, I have really embodied that in many different ways because I know that burnout can be right around the corner if I'm not diligent and intentional about radical self-care. And so what that looks like for me is just having a clear understanding of what are my triggers, what are the triggers that can lead to burnout, and how do I safeguard from those triggers continuing to manifest. And so for me, I do a lot of health and fitness. And so I take vitamins, I work out. I do step away from work when I feel like I need a break so that I'm not just constantly focused on work alone. So there are some other hobbies and interests that I have. I have an emotional regulation coach. I go to therapy routinely. I mean, so the list goes on. I am a devout, in my faith and my belief. And so I draw on that inspiration. But we each have to, again, assess for ourselves what's going to allow us to be whole and grounded and centered so that we don't become burnout and so that we are able to self-soothe when we find ourselves really in those times and moments where it feels like we can't go on. So I think that's critically important. And having, support system can also help with that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, what you're sort of speaking to is being unafraid to hit pause on the part of you that is, the overachiever almost, right? And
Yes.
that is incredibly hard because
Yeah.
I know for a fact when I take time for myself, not so much anymore, but in the past I would feel guilty. Like
Yeah.
I'm not working as hard as other people in my field, or I'd have Gary V's voice screaming in my head that I don't want it bad enough because I took off a day after, working 6 months straight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
It's not
it's
self-indulgence, it's
yes,
self-preservation. Yes.
yes,
And that's the
exactly.
mindset we have to have. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
110%. That I think that's a great sort of quote to put in your head when you do have those feelings of guilt. Like yesterday, I've been going for like a month straight. I decided I was like, I'm gonna take off Monday, and that's it. Phone is on airplane mode.
Uh,
And I'm good. And throughout the day, I was itching to do stuff, and I felt a little bit of guilt. But I woke up feeling way better today, right? Like
yes.
I rested and I felt replenished and I was ready to hit the ground running and everything. And it's proof to myself that while in the short term it may feel like a setback, quote unquote, to take
Yeah.
that day off and not answer those emails, it actually is going to propel me 2 more steps forward when I'm refreshed the next day to actually tackle everything. And I think that's also the other part about is feeling comfortable saying no sometimes as well.
Yes. When you say no, you're setting yourself up for the right yes. And so we
Mm,
cannot feel guilty about assessing our situation and knowing when to set no.
mm-hmm.
Self-care is not just about taking some time away and taking a nap, going to a bubble bath, all those great things. I mean, that can be a
Mm-hmm.
part of it, certainly, but it's also
Yeah.
about setting boundaries, right?
Mm,
And communicating those boundaries. I often use language like, I'm not doing this to you, I'm doing this for me. Just to
mm-hmm.
be able to reiterate that it may feel some way to you, and that's not the intent here, but if I am recharged and refueled and my cup is full, then I can pour out and be able to support you in a much more meaningful way. And so
Mm,
give me this time. Rest is not a luxury. It is a need. It is a necessity, and we all deserve it, right? We treat it as almost a reward. If I get this done, then I can take a
mm-hmm.
nap, then I can sit down, then I can rest, then I can maybe say no to the next project. And we can't think about it in that regard. And unfortunately, that's what's led to this burnout culture that so many people are experiencing right now, whether they are an entrepreneur, they're
Mm-hmm.
working multiple side hustles, or they're actually an employee within an organization. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually something that just came to mind. I had heard this quote from someone, and it rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. And he was basically saying if you have a side hustle, it means that your main hustle is not working, right? And I almost felt like it was a cynical viewpoint, and almost a privileged viewpoint for many people, who are. I live in the New York City area, it's expensive. I had a
Yes.
full-time job, and thank God I was also a DJ, or else I wouldn't have been able to live close to my job, close
Yeah.
to New York City. So I think there is this sort of privileged viewpoint on a lot of those things. And I guess what's your gut reaction when you hear that quote that I just said to you?
Well, first of all, privilege is often invisible to those who have it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to put that out there. I think it's also important to realize that while that could be the truth, that could be the case, that maybe someone is working a side hustle because maybe their main thing, and I put that in air quotes because, who knows, that could be an
Yeah.
assumption, but maybe that's not working out as well for them. So they're, working out an exit or a transition plan. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
also they're being underpaid and they just really needed to
Yes.
be able to support their families. And so we shouldn't make assumptions about it. But I do think that it's important to reiterate an earlier point we made, which is that there's no shaming. I mean, let's be curious and maybe ask questions. Perhaps we can help. Perhaps we can be a resource instead of
Mm-hmm.
just, making assumptions about someone's situation, especially when it's kind of in a negative way. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something to be said for how we can best support each other, when we are finding ourselves, in these situations of juggling a lot, because that's not easy for anyone, right? It's not
Sure.
easy for anyone. Keep in mind that when people are working a lot of these, side hustles, they are sacrificing time away from family, from friends,
Mm-hmm.
from things that may be meaningful to their well-being. And so again, let's be kind and not make assumptions that could leave this negative connotation around someone's decision, and maybe the why behind it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And you just touched on something else about it's time away from your family as well, right? For people who are working these side hustles. And I guess, you talk about in the article that side hustles have become tools for long-term wealth building at the end of the day, right?
Yes.
But I guess in the context of that conversation as to what you're giving up in order to do so, do you think we have to sort of change our mindset, particularly as people of color, or our narrative around the ideas of wealth building?
So I think it's a both and. I believe that it's important to first and foremost have a healthy relationship with money if you
Mm.
are seeking to build wealth. Because if you don't have a healthy relationship with money, then no matter how
Mhm.
much money you make, you are not going to reach any kind of goals because you won't know what to do with it, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the first thing that I will lead with. The other thing is from experience, I can tell you that being an entrepreneur has tremendous upside in terms of setting someone up for success to be able to create wealth. It
Mhm.
has worked very well for my family, and I've seen it for a lot of others that I'm in community and connection with. But that's not the only way. I also know of many families who have been able to achieve a certain status of wealth from simply being able to have upward mobility within the corporate jobs, or jobs, period, whether it's corporate or not,
Mhm.
that they've had. And so I want to just make sure that I am communicating that. But what I do firmly believe is that we have to define wealth
Mhm.
clearly, because if not, then we can see wealth as something that, even though it may be able to be attained, it may not create the type of output, positive output that we're seeking. Money can also destroy us, right?
Mhm.
And I believe that part of that why you want to go after building wealth, it needs to include so that we can help someone else along the way. That has to be a part of our trajectory and our mindset. And I say that because wealth building is it should not be a situation to where we're doing it just to hoard it for ourselves, right? I
Sure.
think that where we can find a way to make social impact, we
Mhm.
need to be able to do that, especially when I think about the those who are in the margins, right? A lot of minority communities who don't have anything, and so my encouragement is that if that is part of your pathway and your trajectory and what you're working for, then make sure
Mhm.
that the why also is because you want to be able to give back and make a difference.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna agree 100% because I think oftentimes a lot of people, and they don't realize it, they're chasing a way to validate the wounded child inside of them almost,
Oh yeah.
many of us didn't grow up with money. We didn't grow up with the external signs of success with the cars, the clothing, and whatever it might be. And I think without realizing it, we're chasing wealth, if you will, just so we can sort of we think it's gonna console that kid that didn't have the cool sneakers that everybody else had, right? And that the kid that was looked down upon because maybe they had the hand me downs or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And I think as we've touched on with a lot of things, it's you got to understand, what is it really worth the sacrifice, right? Is you having the external validation of people seeing that you are a quote unquote success through materialistic items, is that really worth the level of sacrifice that it takes to get there, be it your family life, be it your mental health, be it your physical health, right? And the just overall precious time you're giving up, right? And I think to your point of having a why and all these things, I think we have to get very clear on our motivation, and make
Yes.
sure that it's not coming from a place of unhealed trauma at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And there is a heightened awareness of the dark side of capitalism right now that we know
Mm-hmm.
is circulating in people's mindsets, and with lots of evidence of how that is showing forth, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, that's why I bring up the social impact aspect of it. The motivation and the why is really critical, because if not, we can find ourselves falling prey to that same mindset that, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I earned all that I have. And so everybody else
Mm-hmm.
needs to do the same. And I
Yeah.
don't think that's a society that's going to serve us best at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. It lacks empathy
Oh,
for the fact
absolutely.
that we
Lacks
all have.
humanity.
Yeah, 100%. And quite honestly, without knowing these people from the outside looking in, many of them seem visibly unhappy, even though they have more than they could ever need, right? Because
Yeah.
they're compensating again for that trauma, and no matter the money, the status, it's never going to heal that for you. In the physical sort of accumulation of money and wealth will never heal that personal trauma that you're holding on the inside.
Oh, absolutely. And that is one big motivator. So I'm glad that you're naming that, because it's important for us to be aware of how that shows up as it relates to our relationship with money and wealth building. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're going to find that it's going to have a negative impact on us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Nico, I can talk to you about this for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. Where can people keep in contact with you? I know that you do consulting, you do keynote speaking, and you're doing different content. Where can we push people to check out more of your work?
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm just realizing that I didn't really share, enough about what I do and why this topic of, just supporting people on the margins and having conversations about how we can uplift just all people. Rising tide lifts all boats. But it's because I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. I have a consultancy under my brand name, and we do a lot of work around workplace culture, talent engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion, change management, leadership development, but also that every single one of us can find ourselves in spaces and places where we are seen, heard, valued, and able to contribute to full opportunity for success. And so you can find me. My website is nikawhite.com, nikawhite.com. And that's also where you'll find all of our social media links. Produce a lot of content. Would love to be in community with as many of you as possible who found this conversation riveting. I know I did, so thank you.
Of course.
And I look forward to being in touch.
Yeah, I love, and the DEI thing, it's so heartbreaking the way that this terminology has been colonized to be something that it is not.
Yes.
This, and it's just crazy how fragile the positive steps forward really are, and how easily they can be reversed in just a couple of months. It's almost deflating as somebody who tries to advocate for these things, right? And I can imagine for you, somebody who works in this, it's got to be incredibly frustrating.
Yes, it is definitely frustrating, but I will tell you that no matter what we see in the media wants you to believe the doom and gloom. And yes, there probably are many companies who are pulling away. So the fine print there to read it all, because what I'm finding is that a lot of those companies imagining just so that they can the work. And so the work's not going anywhere. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and by the way, I do like to use those words because the acronym certainly has been weaponized. And I think each word carries a lot of power when they're being stated. But it is about conscious leadership. It is about humanity. It is about belonging and connection. And so I think we're going to find that the work is still going to continue. While it may look a little different, it may be referred to a little differently, it's not going anywhere.
I love that. A little positivity to end the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's absolutely. Thank you.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Dr. Nika White, for hopping on the show. I hope it wasn't too doomy and gloomy for you. I feel like we just had a real conversation. Like, this is my goal. I want these financial literacy conversations for this month to feel like you're talking to friends and family who have gone through it. They've seen some shit, and they're really trying to prepare you for it. And I really feel like that was sort of the outcome of this conversation, if you will. A lot of gems there. We'll tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so first and foremost, I'm realizing now this is episode 97. We're doing 105 episodes this season, so I literally have 8 episodes left of Life as a Gringo Season 3, which is fucking insane. So just mentally preparing you. We basically have a month of shows left, which is just wild. But we'll get into what all that means, further down the road. But as it pertains to this conversation with Dr. Nika White, gigs and side hustles and entrepreneurship and all these different things, I think I just think it's amazing times that we live in, but it's also incredibly difficult. And I never want to fool anybody into thinking it's anything but that, right? And I guess for me, some of the things that really stick out as it pertains to the conversation I just had it's the idea of looking in the mirror and being very real with yourself about if this is really what you want, or what level do you want it at. And there's no right or wrong answer. And I know, I've grown a lot, especially over these last few years, as to my positioning in terms of telling people to go for it. Or, I was always the guy who was like, fuck your job, type of thing. But having gone through, I think, like the entrepreneur's rite of passage in 2024, where I can't divulge too much just because of partnerships and things like that. But when I tell you guys, I really didn't have many wins in 2024 when it came to my business. I'm blessed that I had enough things in the fire. I had enough things to kind of carry me over. But it was a brutal fucking year of 2024. Like, the probably least momentum year of my entire life. Like, it just seemed like every single thing stalled. I couldn't get it right. And I look back and I needed that time. I needed to find clarity on what I really wanted. To Dr. Nika's point, my why wasn't clear to me anymore, right? And I think I had to go through that hardship to just stop and figure out my why once again. But having experienced that year and the brutality of it, I can honestly say this shit ain't for everybody. And I'm not even saying that to puff myself up as being, if you, as like, oh, I'm fucking so tough and mentally tough that, it's like everybody else is weak if they can't handle that. Guys, I really gave up. I was going to give up on working for myself. I was like, fuck it. Maybe this really isn't in the cards for me anymore long term. It's a brutal year. I would much rather be able to count on a paycheck again, consistently and have the comfort of that, a structure, if you will. And thankfully, again, I sort of slowed down, figured out my why, tried some things, and I feel like I've come out on the other side. I know I have this year. But, for me, it became clear that this is what I love, right? That no matter how much I get beat up, no matter how much I try to step away from it, it always pulls me back in. I have a stomach for it because I do genuinely love it beyond money. I love this journey and this lifestyle very much. I love building things. I love, chipping away at it daily. I would do this shit for fun. I love going back and forth with ChatGPT on a fucking Sunday and just dialing in, how can I be better at branding? How can I learn about just going back and forth brainstorming ideas as if it's like I'm in a corporate boardroom, trying to figure things out for my business. Like, I love that shit. I live for it. I'm in Puerto Rico. I'm fucking, on my computer at the coffee shop, loving life, doing it there. Like it's all I want to do. It's like vacation to me. And the shit that sucks so hard, but the positive does outweigh the negative, no matter how fucking brutal it is. But that's not for everybody, and that's okay. I was sort of always subscribed to the idea of like anybody could do what I do, or anybody can build it. And I think in various ways it's true, but maybe not full time. Maybe as just a side thing that you don't have to count on and you have fun with it. And it fulfills you and it fills your cup in that manner, right? But I think also, I don't think 9 to 5 corporate structure is necessarily a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when the culture and the environment and maybe the work are not fulfilling to you or bring you down or don't bring out the best version of yourself. But there's no shame in loving your fucking job and it being a 9 to 5 thing and being okay with that. And that's something I've learned or appreciated. Like, I genuinely wish that I could exist in that structure. My problem is I question everything and I think I could do it better than everybody. and not in a like cocky way. It's just the way my mind works. My boss tells me to do something one way, I'm going to figure out how to do it another way, right? And I become angry and resentful if I can't. And that's my personality, right? For better or worse, I fucking can't exist if I'm not the one making decisions. And that's why this life is, for me, as up and down as it might be, it's the only thing that makes sense to me. And it's okay if that's not you. And I think that's one of my bigger takeaways is like life and everything in it, it's not a one-size-fits-all journey. And I've talked about that so much, but I fail to apply it to certain aspects of life. And I think that's sort of one of the bigger takeaways. There's no shame in punching a clock if you enjoy what you do. And I think I've even seen like Gary Vee like kind of adjust his perspective a bit on that, which, you know, kudos to him. But again, it's what makes you happy. Like, what outweighs the bullshit? And then I think, you know, understanding if it is for you, it's going to be tumultuous. It's not going to be all fun. You have to have a level of discipline, not just when it comes to waking up and taking care of the shit you have to take care of, but a level of discipline of taking care of yourself as well. And I think that's the other takeaway from this conversation is understanding and finding your line before you burn out. When you find yourself, you know, scraping at the bottom of the barrel, making sure you have systems in place that don't trigger you to then go down the dark rabbit hole of being depressed because you're burnt out from everything. You know, creating those systems and those support systems. And I guess the other last aspect of it that I really love, there were so many things in this conversation. I'm just sort of freestyling what's coming to my mind. But the idea of self-made as well. No one is actually self-made. Yeah, you might have busted your ass and put in the work and never had a real handout, whatever it might be. But you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not trying to utilize resources that are out there. Be it education from others who are your peers that are doing similar things. Be in community with those people, getting advice from people, partnering, like Dr. White said, with those who might have skill sets that you don't have. Like, we have to get over ourselves a little bit and seek out opportunities that are out there that potentially could help us. She mentioned those incubator programs for entrepreneurs of color. Like, do some research, find resources you can be a part of. Shout out to Coach Bren, who has been on the podcast before and I worked with my brand Just Be. She was a part of this program called We All Grow Latina, which is like this amazing community, and they have speakers and they have an app, and you're connected to all these amazing Latina entrepreneurs and, you know, coaches, and they do a lot of different things. But within that, you're networking and you're meeting people who do all this cool shit, or you're able to pick their brain, or just by listening to them, you're gaining some knowledge. Like, you have to be a part of all those things. I even mentioned the accounting thing, right? Bro, the only reason I know about, like, how people who are successful in business, you know, have, like, accountants on retainer is because of somebody I dated whose parent happened to have been a successful business owner. And they had an accountant that they could always refer to on a monthly basis that they can work with and knows all their finances in and out, right? But for me, I was just taking it to the regular place I was taking it to when I was working a regular-ass job, you know, and making barely any money. But when you're then an entrepreneur and you're responsible for writing things off and accounting for every dollar made and spent, and understanding where can I not pay as much taxes, right? Just like rich people do. Rich people have high-priced accountants that help them avoid paying as much taxes as you and I do, right? Or moving things around, or claiming losses, or you know, being able to write off business expenses. When I would go to the accountant, I would have to know all that shit ahead of time. They're just punching the numbers, right? They're not actually trying to help me. They don't have the time or probably the capacity to dig in deep and find out where I'm leaving money on the table. And that's just a little anecdote. It's like, how many other fucking things do I not know that successful entrepreneurs are doing on a regular basis, or team members that they have to help them utilize all the opportunities that are out there, right? And again, it's only when your network of people that you know and you speak to and that you reach out to and that you learn from, when that grows, then you begin to learn about other opportunities that are out there. And I think that's sort of a testament to nobody does this alone, right? And last thing I'll say, actually, I talked about cold emailing companies and things like that. I believe in that, and I love Dr. White's pushback of make sure you sort of have something tangible to show them, right? For me, I have a resume of years of work, and my social media showcases who I am and what I do and what I stand for and my talents, if you will. But the opportunity is out there. You don't have to just apply for the job that is listed, but you can somehow create an opportunity as well. Be unafraid to blind email, cold email people. Again, have something tangible that you can show them, something of substance, right? A portfolio. Your social media can be that portfolio of what you do, who you are, right? What are your skill sets that and that you're trying to showcase to them? But pitch people with problems that you want to solve for them and see what they say. It might work out. You might have to send 1,000 of them to get one response, but that one response could change your life. And I'm just saying this as a means of like making you aware of the vast opportunity that is out there, regardless of the path that you want to go down. You just have to think a bit outside the box. And that's what this whole thing about gigs and side hustles is all about. It's using it as a vehicle to create the life that you want, right? To create a custom fit, authentic lifestyle that you want to live, that makes sense for you and your personality, regardless of what the rest of the world thinks. And that's what I'm trying to really get at with all these conversations, and I guess where I stand on the idea of entrepreneurship and everything like that. Like, to Dr. White's point, she said it very clearly: define your why. Like, figure out why you want to do this stuff, and that allow that to guide you into the decisions that you do or don't make moving forward. So great stuff. Financial Literacy Month. I'm actually amped up about this month. Originally, I was kind of like, all right, I guess we're going to do this again. I wasn't super excited about, I was like, how much financial literacy shit can I keep regurgitating almost that isn't already out there, that people aren't sick of hearing? And I feel like we've tapped into a little bit of a uniquer, more raw context or conversation around finances and financial literacy. So I'm really pleased with that. With that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. I will catch you on Thursday with a brand new episode. Till then, stay safe and we'll talk soon. Peace.